I'm Sarah Muleman, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Sarah Muleman.
It is Thanksgiving week here in the United States, and I wanted to take just a moment to tell all you listeners out there how thankful I am for you, for your continued support, and for tuning in each day to listen to Author Stories. This, as I've said before, is a passion project for me, and the fact that I get to do it every day still just blows my mind. But for the rest of this week, we will be taking a break to celebrate Thanksgiving. If you're not in the United States, be thankful with us. It's been a great year. More fantastic stuff is coming your way. The end of this year, 2019, is already starting to book up, and there's lots of great stuff coming your way. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for listening and for sharing with your friends and family and enemies. We do appreciate it. So no more shows for this week. We're coming back next week. We've got some new sponsors joining us that we're going to be telling you about. Lots of great author interviews and more books to talk about. Thank you for listening. Now on to our show. Before we get started, let's talk about some sponsors today. Writing novels is hard, but Dabble makes it easier. Dabble replaces your word processor, doing what it can't. Dabble organizes your manuscript, story notes, and plot. It simplifies story, leaving more room in your brain to create. And after all, that is what being a writer is all about. Dabble was built from the ground up specifically for writing novels. It takes minutes to learn, and it makes writing a joy. See how Dabble will revolutionize the way you write with a free trial at www.dabblewriter.com. Today's episode is sponsored by editor Ellen Campbell. Authors, if you are looking for someone to help shape your words into what you originally intended them to be, Ellen can help you do that. Ellen is one of the most sought-after indie editors out today, and she is one of the best. I've used her. So many other people in the community have used her. There's a link to her website in the show notes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Lynne Truss on the show with me today. Lynne has a fantastic new book called A Shot in the Dark, and you guys know how much I love mysteries, and this is one of the best I've read this year. Welcome to the show, Lynne.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff. It's really kind.
Lynne, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, how interesting. Oh, I wish you'd told me that in advance. I could give that some prior thought.
Well, it's a little bit of a gotcha to make you think on your feet.
I don't know. I think it was always there. I think I've always thought that I would like to be a writer. I think when I was growing up, it was a working class home. We watched television. I was born in 55. But we always read books, and we always used the public library, and we had, my parents, despite watching a lot of television, did read a lot of books. And there was always talk of writing them. Although my parents never did write a book, my dad would often say, when I write my book, it will be about this. So I think it was not a completely impossible idea to me. What I think my sort of what then happened, I suppose, was that I became quite studious and literary, and became aware of the pressure, the anxiety of influence, this sort of sense that there were so many great books in the world. And as a job, I ended up being a literary editor. So that meant that I saw how many really good books there were in the world, and how many of them were neglected as well. And I started to think, well, I'll never be able to do that. So really, when it became a reality was when I was in my 30s and I actually had some therapy because I thought I really want to be a writer, but I'm so aware of all the reasons I shouldn't be one that it's getting in the way of what I want to do. And I actually had some therapy to help me.
Your story is kind of exactly why I asked that question. I think for so, I think it'll bear out. I think so many of us know that we are writers, that thing is inside us. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a gene, if it's a gift, whatever you want to call it. I think writers are kind of born that way. And then for a lot of us, it's a lifelong journey to figure out what we do with it. And, I absolutely love your story that, when you said that you got your education, in studying literature and then, worked as an editor, do you feel like you were trying to express that thing that was in you in that way? And was it satisfying to you?
Well, it wasn't ultimately. I think that's right. I think it was, what would be the word? A displacement or something. It was getting close. It was getting close to what I wanted to do. Sorry, I have dogs that are going to keep barking and want to be let in and out. I'm just going to move the door. Sorry. Sure. But yeah, I think I wanted to be close to it. I wanted to be around books. I wanted to be, but when I did end up, as it were, at the wrong end of the chain. I was editing the reviews of books. And so, that was about as far as you could get from the actual business of writing them, it seemed to be, in the process. And it was very important to me to think, no, I really, really do want to, I want to be on the other end. I want to be creating. So, but as I say, the other thing that was a factor for me, and I don't know if it would be as important in the States. I never really do know about class pressure and stuff in America. We know that it is a big thing in Britain. And I was the wrong class to be writing books as well. And I was very aware that the whole literary culture was surrounded, and who got reviewed, who was reviewing. This was all rather a club of middle class, upper class people, and people who wrote books were often came from families of people who wrote books. So it wasn't universally true. There were obviously people who broke through, but that was another reason why I felt maybe it wasn't right for me. And I would not struggle, but I would be despised, for attempting to write books. So. Yeah, it's but the being involved in as it were, in the sort of business of books probably gave me an advantage. But I didn't see it that way at the time. I thought, look at all these books piling up around me, which are all very, very good, very, very, most of them have all sorts of things to commend them, and yet, they're still in a pile.
This idea of the creative class, the writerly class of folks, and being something that that can't be attained by the rest of us, the rabble, if you want. Do you think that those kinds of ideas are still pervasive, and do you think that was a real thing, or is that something that we kind of say to ourselves to keep from doing the thing that we want to do?
I don't think it was imaginary. I think it was certainly a factor of, I think it really does help people along the way if their father was a famous writer or a famous person or a politician or what have you. There is a lot of a lot happens because people know each other. What was the first part of the question? Sorry. I know I like the first part.
Yeah, it was. Do you feel like that is still the case? Are we still going through that, or have things changed?
I would suspect it's changed. I think it's generally changed. I think as well people are looking for new voices, aren't they? And that seems to be very much the way publishers are, that they do want to hear new voices and they want to reflect society more broadly. So I think yes, I think it's probably easier, and because of creative writing programs and so on, so which you don't qualify through birth for those things, do you? So I do think that I'm sure it's better. I'm sure it is, and it might be. Yeah, I mean, I think I was making a lot of excuses for myself, so that was just one of them. So,
don't we all?
Yeah, but I do think that your original question about are we born sort of thing. I'm sure that's what I was always meant to do. I was always meant to write daft books set in the 1950s.
Well, I know that when you ignore that thing, how miserable people become. So, you have to give it some weight, that if this thing can make me this miserable, it must be something I'm, destined to do, if you want to use that kind of language.
Yeah.
So when you had this sort of epiphany, and was it an instant epiphany, or was this something that built in you, where you had that therapy session and knew that this was something that you were going to have to do?
I think a few things happened at once. I mean, actually, my father had died not long before. I'm sure that had something to do with it. That makes you feel that life is short and you should get on. So possibly that was the initiating incident. I was in my mid-30s, I suppose. And the thing is, I've often had to. In my career, I've done a lot of things and then stopped doing them. And I look back and think, oh, that's odd that I could still be doing that job. I could still be a literary editor. I decided, okay, if I want to do what I want to do, I must stop doing this job, which is a very, very lovely job and that people envy me for, because I actually want to do what I want to do. And in some way, sorry about my dog, in some way, I've done that lots of times, actually, repeatedly. I have thought, well, this is all very successful and people are all very happy with me and I could stick with this, such as writing about punctuation. And then I think, well, I don't want to. That isn't what I want to do. And I do seem to have the strength to do that. I do seem to have the sort of nerve in some way to... I do seem to have the nerve to do that. So I think that was the first one when I thought, well, if I continue doing this job, I won't have enough brain left over to write. So I'll leave my job and I will write for a living. Because as a journalist, I had some journalistic, obviously I did have journalistic contacts. I had already proved myself as a critic, that kind of thing. So I could do that. And that would, as it were, free me up a bit more to write my own stuff. And so that was a bit of a gamble, and it was certainly a gamble with my livelihood, and I did it. And I think that's happened time and again, really, actually. I keep on saying, well, this is all very nice, but it isn't what I want to do. And so, the biggest trap of all, of course, was having huge success with a book about language, which I was very proud of that book and I loved it, and I couldn't have been happier that people loved it. But I didn't want to be just the person who talks about apostrophes for the rest of my life, and so I had to say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't mind that, I'm very happy about the book so far, but I'm not going to write another one, and I'm not going to follow that path, because that's not actually what I want to do.
How do you go from writing those kinds of books to switching gears and talking about the thing that you really want to do? Where do you start when you're shifting?
I'm not sure, really. I suppose I'm talking about a rather negative response, aren't I, really, of just thinking, well, that's what I don't want to do. What happened was that Eat, Shoots and Leaves came along. I had made a program about punctuation and for the BBC, and someone asked me if I'd like to write a book, and it seemed like a nice idea, so I did it. And it was actually for me a sort of it was sort of a means to an end, really. I just wanted to be back in print, in a book. I'd had another big hiccup in my life, which was my sister dying, and I'd given up a job. And so at that point, it was a good idea to write this little book that would go into print very quickly and couldn't fail because it couldn't succeed, was the way I looked at it. I thought it's the sort of book that no one could ever say, I see your book on punctuation didn't do very well, because who would expect a book on punctuation to do very well? So I thought it was rather canny to do something that was sort of in that way quite safe. And then, of course, it did incredibly well. And that was very gratifying, but kind of scary. And it was wonderful and life-changing in many ways. And then I had to write another book almost immediately. My publishers, all both in here and in America, wanted another book quite quickly. And I said, well, I have had an interest for a while in rudeness. I'd written sort of essays on rudeness, and I suggested that I could write a book about that, because I would love to do a bit more reading in sort of sociology and so on about why people behave the way they do in public. I thought that was a really interesting subject. Things were changing at that time very much because of mobile phone use, because of iPods and so on. So this sense that people were inside bubbles when they were in public, and that they behaved badly towards each other as a result, that was really interesting to me. And so I wanted to write that book, and was very happy to get it off my chest. So that was fun to do, actually, talk to the hand, and I was very pleased with how it came out, really. And but that was it as far as writing grumpy books, because they were a bit grumpy, and so I thought it'd be very good now to stop doing grumpy, and at that point what I really wanted to write about was sport, because at that point, for 4 years in the 90s, 96 to 2000, I had written about sport for the Times newspaper. And it had been an extraordinary experience for me to go from being a very literary person who wrote about books and films and television and so on, to writing about stuff that actually happened, that you wrote about it as it was happening. I found that absolutely fascinating. And it was also being in a job like that when I was, a middle-aged woman, not exactly welcomed into the world of sports writing. It was also something I really, really wanted to write about. So at that point, I said, well, that's it. I don't want to write another book about language, which was what I was supposed to do. I want to write a book about sport. And it caused a big ruction in my life, because in order to do it, I had to leave my publisher. I had to, because he didn't believe that I wasn't going to write a book about language, and sort of start again in my life. So yeah, that was a big one. Anyway, having done that, that was all my non-fiction that I ever wanted to write was now disposed of. I had written my 3 non-fiction books, and from then on it was I wanted to write novels and so on, and stories, and that's what's happened since, really. And I really I love the idea of writing a series of novels. That's always been the goal, really, and so I'm very happy now that I've embarked on a series, because I love the idea of some continuity, actually. having had all this discontinuity, I really like the idea of having some continuity now.
Well, you could think of it as discontinuity, or you could say, that I have pursued the things that I was passionate about, and I did the things that a lot of people are scared to do. One thing that, when you're writing a series, especially if that series is successful and people start, really engaging with the characters and the settings and the types of things that you write, I think it becomes harder to go write that other thing that you're passionate about once people are really invested.
Oh, well, I don't mind. I'm really,
Who cares? I'm going to do what I want to do anyway.
Sure, I'll have other thoughts as I go along, but I'll try and build them in. I mean, I'm not. I will probably build them into the series.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of focusing on these people. The thing is that this crime novel, I did actually write. I expect it says so on the jacket there that it was. I wrote a radio series I did four series. About these characters on the radio, and that took from say something like 2007, 2012, something like that. So I've actually I have lived with these characters a long time, and it seems to me limitless, my love for these characters. So I'm banking on that, obviously, that I will continue to love them forever. But I certainly, having written 2 of the books already, the second one is ready to go, but won't come out until next year. I'm still just loving them. I mean, sort of reinventing them for the books, but sort of I know them well and I love them.
So where did the initial idea for this for these characters come from? And I'll just tell everybody that A Shot in the Dark, the new book that's out now, is a humorous murder mystery, which seems like an oxymoron, but I after talking to you a little bit, I think I get a sense of kind of your wry sense of humor, and that really comes out in the book. So what was the initial motivation to write about dark things, but to try to kind of find the humor in it?
I don't know. I mean, I have read, I suppose, quite a few comic. I mean, Carl Hyacin is obviously hilarious and deals with some ghastly things, doesn't he? Horrible crimes and so on. And we have Kate Atkinson here, I suppose, whose books were very lovely. The Jackson Brodie novels, which were, private detective, and they were funny and had lots of coincidences and so on. So I know there is a genre really of funny crime. Well, it was, as I say, it was originally for the radio, and I don't know, the actual inspiration, the funny idea that sort of sparked the whole thing really was the film Brighton Rock, and Brighton Rock sits behind all these in my Constable Twitten things. It's bound to, because it's mid-century. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. It's mid-century. It's Brighton. It's very seedy, and it's about razor gangs and all this stuff. And it's very unpleasant, but it's very memorable, Brighton Rock. And the first thing you see in the film of Brighton Rock is Graham Greene. It's a novel, but it was made in a film, and the film is very, very well known here. The first thing you see in the film is, you're about to go into the dark alleys of Brighton. You're about to see these real low-life scum, But it begins with a shot of Brighton Beach and loads of people having fun and frolicking in the sea and so on. And a legend goes up that says, I can't quote it exactly, but it says something like, before the war, Brighton was full of scummy low-life who carved each other up with razors. But no more. No more. Brighton is now a very happy place, and it's all been cleaned up by the police. So don't forget, come to Brighton. So it's sort of, obviously this was a deal done with the council that they said, you can shoot the film in Brighton if you put something like this at the beginning that says, don't expect Brighton to be full of criminals. And I just thought, wouldn't it be funny if the police actually believed that they had, when they saw the film, they thought, oh, good, we've cleaned up all the crime. We've cleaned up all the crime in Brighton. And so that was the initiating idea, which was the police, the inspector at the police station. What I have in my book is I've invented an incident in 1951 called the Middle Street Massacre, which was obviously contrived by a third party, as I say, but basically 2 gangs meet each other in a place called Middle Street, and someone starts shooting and they all kill each other. And they end up with this sort of 2 piles of bodies, and the policemen have not intervened. They've been having an ice cream round the corner deliberately and let it all transpire. And so now they have cleaned up Brighton as far as they're concerned. There is no crime. because all these criminals killed each other. And that's the sort of basis of Inspector Steen's, reputation and so on. And so then he's very reluctant ever to admit that there is any crime, because it would sort of destroy the myth of the Middle Street Massacre. So
Right.
I once found, actually, I don't know why I looked it up, but I looked up Middle Street Massacre once online and found that people thought it was a real thing that I had just used in my novel, and I didn't know how to react to that, really. It sort of said, Lynne Truss used it, it's quite just sort of dismissive of me.
Oh, that's so funny.
But actually, no, I made it up. It's entirely out of my own head, the Middle Street Massacre.
Well, it feels a little bit like the way our news gets started these days. Is well, I saw it on the internet. Of course, it's true. Oh, that's so
Don't
funny.
believe it. If you ever look that up, don't believe it. I'm sure I made it up.
Oh man, that is so funny. So you've got the character of Stein, and with a great contrast of Constable Twitten. Tell us about Twitten. Where does he come from, and how did he form in your mind?
Well, I think I just thought there has to be there has to be an existing setup, which is not good. So there's Inspector Steen, there's his lovely sergeant, and there's a char lady at the obviously Brighton Police Station probably would have had more people in it, but basically we believe there's just these three of them, and then along comes a very keen young man who is very intelligent and has done very well at training college, and who in A Shot in the Dark has actually been he's already been in 6 different police stations. They've always sent him on because he's just too annoying for being so clever and always pointing out their deficiencies. So he's found himself in Brighton. So he's the outsider who can see what's wrong with the setup there. And I just love him. I mean, because he's very honest, he's very keen, and he's very bright. His father, I think it's very useful that his father is someone who has written about the psychology of crime. So he's very much better informed than anybody was in 1957
Right.
about things like narcissism and so on. He drops all this sort of stuff. I think it's quite improbable that anyone at that stage would know that kind of thing. But he's the sort of person who would say, I think we should set up some criminal records, and that will help us find criminals. And they will say, well, that's a job for a girl. That's more a job for a girl, isn't it? Typing and things. So he's very much on his own, trying to solve crimes for one reason or another. So I just totally I love him, and I hope that the main thing though about him is his youth. He is only 22, and so what I can't do with this series is I'm not going to sort of make each book go forward by about a year or something, which people often do with series. I'm going to move things on by about a month ago, because I don't, it would be very odd if he was a man of 35 still behaving like a keen young man who can see, he has to be very young to be liked, actually, I think, and for it to be believable.
Well, and another thing that you get with a character like that, we've all read the mystery series where we've got the kind of weather-worn inspector who's kind of been through it all and is jaded and really
Drinking
suspects
too
everyone. But when you've got this really kind of wet behind the ears constable, and his altruism is just there on his sleeve, and he definitely has a different view on the world. Yeah.
No, I'm really pleased about that. I mean, how world weary can you get, really? I mean, they're
Right.
A lot of the TV, adaptations. Oh no, he listens to jazz. He drinks too much. He's got no wife. Got divorced. Daughter hates him. All those sorts of things. Twitten has none of that.
Right.
He's still got his I Spy books from when he was a child. With him. And And the letter we used to have these. I bought some to sort of look at, but they were a bit before my time. But there used to be these books called I Spy, and they were for clever precocious children, to fill in. And when they'd filled it in, they sent it in to someone called Big Chief I Spy, and they would get a letter of commendation or a feather or something, to say how marvellous they were. And of course, in his belongings, he's got a letter from Big Chief I Spy responding to his letter, pointing out mistakes in the original I Spy books. So Twitten has sort of done beyond I Spy. So he's very much his childhood is not that far behind him, really. So he's not jaded.
And setting the book in 1957, you told that great story a minute ago about the how he wants to be progressive and move things along, and well, that's something that ladies do. That really affords you the ability to kind of lampoon some of these kind of leftover things that we're still dealing with, but maybe in a more subtle way. But you get to just shine a light on it, and just really poke fun at it here.
It's great. I mean, someone said to me at an event the other day, why is the only woman a char lady? And I said, because she's invisible, because she's working class and she's a woman. So anything she says, well, no one will take any notice whatsoever. And that's sort of, satire. It's just truth, and it's quite handy, for writing these stories. But that's true. That's sort of true, and it really helps. Actually, it does. Yeah, it helps with the stories. Yeah,
that's fantastic. When you're writing satire and the humor that allows us to really get at the root of things, but with a smile, you can really deal with issues if you can do it with a little bit of a chuckle or a wry smile. How is there ever an opportunity where you're writing a scene and you want a little comic relief or but how do you, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you balance that with the story just becoming silly? Where's the line there where we can chuckle but not break our kind of disbelief?
I think it's tough. I think it's tough to know, actually. And one person's lovely humorous is someone else's silly. So there's no objective way of measuring when does this get too over the top. I must say that what I'm just aware of is that the things that I wrote for the radio are much too over the top, and I've used some elements from the radio series, but I can't use much from the radio series because it was all too big. It was all too big, too silly, big coincidences. It just doesn't work. Just doesn't work on the page, and so I can gauge that. I can certainly gauge that, but I think it is difficult. Where sometimes though, I mean, it is all a miracle. It's all a mystery, isn't it? Where all this comes from. But when I was writing the second book, in one chapter, I thought I really need something funny now. I really need something funny in this. Right now, I need something that sort of it will become as a lovely surprise. And I can tell you now because it's going to be a long time before this book comes out. But in the second book, Sargent Brunswick goes undercover, playing trumpet in a nightclub. He learned trumpet as a child, and so he goes into the nightclub where there's something going on, some criminal thing going on, and the drummer in the band we already know works for a criminal in the town. And so I just then, I said, he might have thought that he was the only person, who wasn't a genuine person. But actually, the man on the saxophone worked for MI5. The man the man playing the guitar, worked for Special Branch. The man is from Interpol. and this sort of there's just one bloke left who is not working for someone else who's just a musician, and he thinks the others are stiffs and can't stand them, because they've all so jaded and been in the business so long. But I really liked that idea, and it became, of course, quite important in the plot. But it came about because I just needed something funny at that point, at that moment, and that's weird, isn't it? I mean, that's just sort of. I mean, it might be desperate. Perhaps it comes across as desperation, but I actually thought that's nice. I really like that, and it's something Well, the great thing for me writing these books, as opposed to radio, of course, is that I have a narrative voice, so I can tell people. I can just say, as the omniscient narrator, I can say that's who those people are in the band. It doesn't have to come out through dialogue or a surprise or a scene or whatever. I can just say this bloke has been reporting to Scotland Yard for the last 6 months and nothing has happened yet, and he's getting very bored. So
and then we as the reader get to have a chuckle at that without the scene turning silly.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I really hope so. Yeah. And just enjoy the fact that it's a surprise, oh God, this is worse than we thought. This is worse than we thought.
Oh, that's so funny. You mentioned earlier that Twitten's father, had done all this sociological research and work, and so therefore he benefited from information that most people wouldn't have had then. When you're creating characters, how much of their backstory are you dealing with? That maybe things that don't necessarily have to come out on the page, but I guess what I'm asking is when you create characters, how much of their backstory are you developing before you write them?
I think quite a bit. I think the thing about the period is so important because everyone has to be defined by the war to a certain extent. In 1957, what were they doing during the war? And I think there are still things I don't know about the backstories of these characters. But the more you know them, the more you can get the backstory right in a way. I mean, in the second book, I do give quite a lot of attention to where Inspector Steen comes from, because his background is interesting, and I decided that his mother was from a very wealthy family, and his father was a policeman. I've always known his father was a policeman. But his father, it turns out, was a sort of bobby who was killed on a bridge in London when Steen was 10 or something. So, and his mother had been disowned by the big, the country family that she came from. So they had it quite hard. And the mother and father were not very happy together, and so on. And so I invented I'm very pleased with the thing that brings them together, because it's an actual historical thing that happened with the Bloomsbury group. But that's far too much information. But and that is funny. But at the same time, this does explain quite a lot of his prejudices. It explains how he doesn't like things to be. He's quite happy to leave things unresolved. There's a sort of, it's quite nice in a way to once you know the character, you can actually invent the reason for it, rather than the other way around. So I think we will learn more about the backstories of each of the people as we go along, because it will make sense. And we'll want to know it. You want to know more about someone when you know them quite well, don't you?
Right. Lynne, the book is full of twists and turns that keep us guessing as we go. As a writer, how much plotting do you do ahead of time, or are you a discovery writer that figuring out the story as you go?
It's pretty much that. It's pretty much discovering as I go. I love I often wonder if I misread this advice or whether it was advice from Stephen King. But in Stephen King's book on writing, he has this wonderful image of a sort of archaeology of that you'll plot. You find a bit of the plot sticking out of the sand, as it were, and you you think, I wonder what this is, and you start to brush away and dig away and stuff, and you reveal more and more of it. And if you do it really carefully, you get the whole thing out in one piece. And I love that image. And I suppose because it corresponds to the way I do work. Yeah, I sort of think I sort of know what this is. I do know what this is, but I can only see a little bit of it at the moment. And I'm going to keep on brushing, until it sort of becomes clear. And I think that's quite a sort of, I couldn't plot things out too far, too well, because I as I'm writing, the joy of the writing is the invention. So the detail that comes up in the writing is actually always going to be important in the plot. I don't have detail that's not there, that's just left there. The detail is always going to be made significant. So I can't write it any other way, because I just do have an aim. I have a goal. I know and I now have a shape. I know the sort of shape of things. And in the first book, in A Shot in the Dark, I always knew what the climax was going to be. And I won't say what it is, but the climax for Twitten is a very. I knew what that was, because that was pre-written, as it were. So I knew that. But it's nerve-wracking working the other way. But it's sort of, I don't think I could really do it because I would change it. I would set it out and then I'd change it anyway.
Well, and I think a lot of people that are, hardcore plotters, would say, then if you're discovering a mystery as you write it, then how are you dealing with things like foreshadowing and all of that? And, my answer to them would be, editing. That's, you shouldn't be publishing a first draft. But once the book is finished, then you know what the story is, and you can go back and add those things that need to be put in, or maybe a red herring here or there. You understand the story then. But what about the role of editing? When you get finished, how do you approach that?
Well, I've got what's happened with both these books is that I've probably done a couple of edits myself first, and then I've sent it to my editor at Bloomsbury in London, who is a pretty brilliant editor, actually. And she was never very interested. Every time we talked about the books in advance, she'd be entertained by the idea of the funny stuff, but she'd always say, it's got to work. It's got to work as a crime novel. And that was her, absolute mantra. So I once it's been through her and she's happy, I know that it works as a crime. I know that it must work as a crime novel, because and that gives me a huge confidence in the book that perhaps I wouldn't have otherwise. But she is so good, and so anything that doesn't quite add up, or anything left over, something that points in the wrong direction, it just goes. And I think it's a lovely process, actually. I've really appreciated working with her. She's very, very good. And so with both books, I do feel that there is nothing that anyone could object to. They couldn't say, "Oh no, that didn't deal fairly with the reader," or something. It's always going to be it's always going to work as a plot. So that's very, very good. And like all editors, she's got funny questions. She doesn't like the word suddenly. We have to take the word suddenly out all the way through. Things like that. But obviously, as a writer, in my sports book, I remember the copy editor said to me, "Do you know you've used of course 96 times in this book?" And I was so shocked. And it's very, very useful sometimes just to have, obviously it drove them nuts that I used the word. I kept saying "of course." And now I spot it so much in other people's writing and think,
right.
Take that out.
Well, that's when you reply, "Of course I used it that many times."
Of course I did. So we reduced the of courses. I don't use suddenly anymore. It's so funny. When I first worked for the Times, when I first went to the Times, the editor there said you cannot start any sentence, and certainly any story, with the word it, because what it is has not been established yet. So of course, we all went away saying it was a dark and stormy night. It is a truth universally acknowledged that and there are many, many great works that begin with the word it, but at that point, no one in the Times was allowed to start with the word it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah.
Good old Lynne, just breaking rules and just annoying editors everywhere she goes. It's fantastic. Well, Lynne, the new book is called A Shot in the Dark, a Constable Twitten mystery. It's available everywhere now. This book is fantastic. I love it so much. I told you before we started recording that I had just gotten the book, yesterday, but I already am just knee deep in it because it just sucked me in. If people are not familiar with you and your work, is there a place where they can find you online and connect with you and learn all about you?
I have a website, yes, lynnetruss.com. So that has, a pretty good account of my career anyway, is on there. A few stories. I've been doing stories recently on the radio as well, so there are some reprinted stories. Well, some stories are on there as well.
Nice. I know that you said you're working on book 2 now of the Inspector Twitten mysteries. What else are you up to? You said that you're doing some more radio. What else is keeping you busy these days? It's
mainly that. I've got a little series on Radio 4 at the moment on BBC, which is I talked to three people about travel. I realised that I was getting very, very world weary about travel. I hate the process of travel. And I often think, what was that? I often watching TV and think, I've been there. And I think, what does that count for? What does that count for at all? I've been there. Why did I go there? Why do people think they have to keep going to all these places? And so, especially when it's so hideous, the whole business of travel is now so hideous. So I talked to some people who are quite enthusiastic about travel, and those little programs are on the radio. And then I'm writing more stories. The BBC asked me to write a set of stories initially, 15-minute stories, which I would read myself, and they were to be set in a fictional location. And so I made up a fictional location on the south coast here, based on a settlement, as it were, on the cliffs. It's called Peacehaven, and it was founded during the First World War, and it's a bit featureless. It's really quite featureless, and it's very, very windy up there. It's not at all a pleasant place to live. But a lot of nice people do live there, and so I called the place Meridian Cliffs because it's the meridian from Greenwich, the prime meridian, zero, crosses it, leaves England there, and that there's a monument to the meridian in Peacehaven. So I called it Meridian Cliffs, and I started writing short stories about the people who live there, and implying that I live there, a bit like Lake Wobegon,
right.
Garrison Keillor. That I sort of know these people, and I know so much about them. I know their inner thoughts. I'm completely omniscient about these people, and so then they asked for another 10, and so this year I'm just doing 3 for next year because it was terribly hard to manage 10 and a novel in a year. To me, I thought that was rather demanding, so I've cut it back this year. But I'm doing those at the moment, so I'll start my next novel after Christmas. That's the plan, and they're lovely to do, but they are, to come up with a separate, interesting, bittersweet sort of story on demand is pretty hard, actually.
Well, I sense maybe a new nonfiction book coming out, the Travel Weary World Traveler or something.
Yes, don't go.
Oh, I would read that. I would totally read that. Lynne, this has been so much fun talking with you. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. We've linked up the new book, Shot in the Dark, in the show notes here, and we're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of it. Thank you so much for taking time to come on today.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. You can find archives of all of the shows at hankgarner.com, and when you're there, please subscribe. Up next is an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason ate Thanksgiving dinner alone at the Horseman restaurant. He had the place to himself. Everyone else had somewhere to be. He picked at his burger and fries, thinking of meals past. Thanksgiving had always been Eliza's favorite holiday, as Halloween had always been his. Jason glanced at the menu propped at his elbow. The horseman with his hand held high, carrying a tray with burgers and a shake. The horseman he'd seen on Halloween was no cartoon. That horseman was a thing of crematorium ash, of grave clothes and withered grass, riding a horse of autumn leaves and snail shells and pieces of skull. Jason's hand rose to the tender stripe of skin on his neck. The hatchet cut. "You okay, honey?" Jennifer, the waitress, appeared at his elbow. She had dyed her hair since he'd first met her. A pink stripe ran through the gray now, as if she had stuck her head in a cotton candy machine. "Yeah, I'm full." She raised an eyebrow. "That bad, huh?" Jason glanced at his plate, still piled with food. "Just not hungry." "You know, I saw the Headless Horseman once," said Jennifer, refreshing Jason's cup. She glanced about, deciding something. She set the pot down on a nearby table and slid into Jason's booth with some difficulty, sucking her belly in. "I've seen him," she whispered. "Just like you." "When?" "Oh, 10 years ago." Jason glanced around to see if the cooks or busboys were watching, to see if she was playing a prank. "Where?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "East of here. Sam and I used to live out on Sawmill River Road. I worked at my daddy's Applebee's franchise, you know. It's still there. Daddy sold it, though. It was around Halloween time and I was coming off shift. It had been a night, believe me. Parties of like 20. We sang to the little brats, 'Happy, happy birthday' from all of us at Applebee's." "The Horseman?" "Right." She produced cigarettes. "Do you mind?" Jason shook his head. "Thanks. Don't tell the smoke police." Jason slid the saucer from beneath his coffee mug to serve as an ashtray. It was about midnight, probably. I counted my tips. And those little bastards stiff you, by the by. So I wasn't in a good mood. I was waiting for Sam to pick me up. I was smoking in the parking lot, trying not to catch my hair on fire, and I heard this thunder, coming down the Pocantico Hills from the direction of the hollow. Rumble, 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 but it was clear out, and the sound got closer and closer. We had a full moon that night, hanging over the top of the ridge, and I saw him come up the other side, this black shape on a horse, fast as the devil late for church. He was down the hill before I knew it, coming right at me, and he jumped Sawmill River, kaboom! And when he reached the parking lot, I saw. She drew one finger across her neck. Nothing. No head. And it wasn't any real horse, either. Too damn fast. He was in a hurry. Didn't even see me. Whoosh! My apron blew up. The dumpster started rolling. Car alarms. Blew out my damn cigarette. He shot across the field. Beeline due east. Never saw anything like it. So... She patted Jason's hand. "I know you're getting laughed at. But not by me." She stubbed her cigarette in the saucer. "Some of us believe you."